Hello and welcome to the podcast from Diggers and Dreamers, the organisation that's been the face of communal living in Britain since the 1980s. Whatever kind of intentional community you're interested in, whether it's communes, co-ops, co-housing or anything else, Diggers and Dreamers is where you begin. And now, here's our podcast host, Kirsten Stevens-Wood.
Our guest today was born into an intentional community. Nancy Thompson takes us through a captivating journey, which includes her mother's decision to join the Shrub Family commune and raise her children there. Nancy reflects on what it was like to start life in a community and talks about the multiple crisscrossed connections with Albion fairs, the Globs, Whole Foods and the travellers scene. Nancy describes her early years as living in a kid's world, surrounded by other children whose parents had chosen to live at Shrub. As an adult, Nancy reflects on how growing up in and around communes shaped her perspective on life.
Maybe if we could just start off with, I understand that you were born in the Shrub commune, so perhaps maybe go back a little bit further than that and tell us about how that all came about, maybe something about your mum or your parents and how you ended up being born in a commune.
Okay, right. Well, so my mum, she moved to Shrub in 1973 with my older two brothers and my elder sister. She'd been living in a trailer in the East Midlands on her own as a single parent, sort of in pretty sort of dire circumstances. Really, she was struggling as a single mother, I think, and she just felt it wasn't the best place to bring up her children, on her own. She felt like there needed to be other grown-ups and children around her. Previous to that, she had been living with Romany gypsies, but that hadn't really worked out, and she was sort of trying to live in that way, but without an extended family and any support. And she didn't have much money, and she had, I think, been attending something called encounter groups, where she'd possibly met someone who knew about something called the Communes Network, which was a self-published kind of directory of communes, which you probably all know about. Yeah. So she got a visit from a friend of hers who said, "Oh, you should have a look at this directory of communes. There's quite a few starting up, and you could go and visit maybe, or see if you might like to live in one." So she looked through it, and I guess she was sort of looking to the ones nearest to her. So and there were lots in East Anglia at the time. But I don't know if you know much about the East Anglian commune scene, but some of them had various sort of focuses and themes. So there was one commune that was sort of for writers and artists to kind of develop their artisticness or whatever. And then there was another commune that was like full of rock. They're sort of in a rock band, but they all have the same kind of mindset, in the sense that they were dropping out of mainstream society. They were not into consumerism. They were not into class. They were sort of, it was a kind of new scene, a new movement. It was quite exciting, really. But anyway, she didn't consider herself to be particularly artistic or musical, but she was very much into keeping animals and living in the countryside and growing vegetables and things like that. So she decided to write a letter to the Shrub family, basically, because she thought, oh, they sound like what I want to do. She had a goat, pony, and I don't think she didn't have a car actually at the time.
Was your mum horse-drawn at that point?
No, she wasn't. She was for years, off and on, for a very long time. But she's got quite a sort of complex background. She actually came from sort of landed gentry, for want of a better.
Right.
She wasn't upper class, but she came from sort of that kind of ilk. And I think that there's always been a bit of a thing about the gypsies and the gentry. I don't know if you know that folk song, the Raggle Taggle Gypsies.
Oh yeah, I used to love that song.
Okay, well, that is basically the story of my mum's life. Off of the gypsies, because my granny was like a terrible snob, and she, you know, my mum and her brother actually grew up in very isolated, you know, they weren't allowed to talk to anyone with an accent and stuff like that, you know, but if the gypsies came, they'd go and have a cup of tea with them because they knew all about horses and dogs and stuff. So
it is that affinity with the land and animals and all of those sorts of things. There's definitely a thread there, isn't there?
Absolutely. And also I think with the gypsies are a very proud race, you know, they tend to work for themselves. They don't like working for other people, and they see themselves on a par with gentry, basically. And certainly my granny saw them like that too. And my mom was utterly obsessed with horses, so she, you know, she actually, when she first left home, she worked at Newmarket Racecourse. You know, she worked like a dog, mucking out and cleaning tack and stuff. But yeah, so she but I think she'd got into these encounter groups, and I think that during the 70s and sort of late 60s, I think a lot of people were dealing with trauma, you know, sort of like the two generations of war, um you know, the trauma of like the class system, being sent away to boarding school, and or like being battered, or whatever kind of trauma they were trying to work through. And I think that the whole kind of hippie movement was very revolutionary in that time. I think a lot of people were wanting to find a different way to live, and to not, they didn't want to buy into the whole kind of 1950s consumerism, wear this corset and put on this deodorant. They wanted something a bit more comfortable. Do you know what I mean?
Although I think it is quite hard to you know, for those who perhaps weren't living in it, to think how close, you know, like the 1940s and the end of World War II, and real poverty and austerity, and then the dawning of the welfare state, and this sort of this sea change in terms of culture and ideology. But I would say there was a thread of history kind of following us through there. So for example, you said your mum was a single mum, and I think that would have been really tough in the 1970s.
Yeah, it was really tough. I mean, it was tough in the 90s. I mean, she had my sister in 1961.
Yeah.
Wedlock. The father was Moroccan, and when my mum knocked on the door of her mother's mansion, my granny slammed the door in her face and said, "How could you do this to me?" She was ashamed. And then the next child father was a gypsy, and he was legitimate. So by that point, my uncle wasn't married, didn't have children, so he was a potential heir. So my granny was even more angry. I think my mum did whatever you could possibly do to annoy my granny. Yeah, so she was sort of like a black sheep, really. And I think, and also she was very damaged. I mean, she didn't really have a mother. She had a nanny until she was 7. And then the nanny was dismissed because she was too expensive. So then she was sent to a school which was not as expensive. And when she went to these encounter groups, she went to lots of different types of therapies. There was sort of like primal therapy, screaming therapy, you know. And she said, I remember her saying to me, she went to this, you know, primal therapy group, and they were all encouraged to kind of cry for their mummies, and she cried for her nanny, which is just heartbreaking. And Mrs. Cotton, she was called, and she was sent away and she never saw her again. So it's really sad, you know. She didn't really have a proper relationship with her mother. She was a very kind of cold, distant thing. So I think all of these kind of groups were like a big thing for her. So anyway, she wrote a letter to Shrub Farm and said, you know, can I come and visit with my children? And they said, yes, you can. And she hired a car to go there because she didn't have one. And they were all really shocked that she'd hired a car, because we were really poor at Shrub Farm. Like I don't think anyone had a car. They were like, oh, she's hired a car.
Yeah.
She could get there. Anyway, she stayed for like a week or so, and they all seemed to get on all right. So then she went back to the East Midlands, and then she got a friend of hers to help her load up all her stuff. I think she even took the trailer with her, actually. Not quite sure how she managed that, but she loaded up. She had a friend with a horse box, and she loaded up, you know, everything. And they moved to Shrub, and yeah, it was like a new beginning, really, for her.
So that was your mum, and she already had three children by that point.
Yeah. So my older sister had just turned 13, I think, 12, or maybe 12, 13. And my brother was about well, my older brother was about 8, and then Danny was about 3 or 4. So my big sister wasn't very happy about the move, because she had just got into secondary, you know, she got into grammar school, and she just didn't really want to move. And she'd moved such a lot when she was little, because my mum used to travel around. I mean, she went to 12 different primary schools, you know, so it's tough being the new girl all the time, do you know what I mean?
And 13 is quite a pivotal age for young people. That sort of those 4 to 5 years are quite, they shape you.
Yeah, they definitely do. So I think she wasn't so happy. My brothers were actually quite happy, because it was pretty intense living in the caravan with mum. I think she was probably quite depressed, and you know, she's quite violent. I mean, I think in the old days people were a bit more heavy-handed, weren't they? But the thing is about moving to the commune is it took the pressure off, and it meant mum wasn't lonely. She had other grown-ups around, and she didn't have to cook so much. I mean, she hated cooking.
And she's not on her own there.
yeah. So, you know, she only had to cook like once every 9 days. There was at that when she first moved to the commune in 1973, it was quite the people who originally bought it had moved away, and there was kind of different people coming and going. But when she first moved there were at least 2, if not 3 other single mothers, one of whom she was Australian actually, and she'd met another chap, and they'd moved to England from Australia with her children, not his children. So it was, and I think for my brothers, particularly my older brother, he was just hugely relieved to be out of the caravan, because it was kind of safer for him in a way. You know, like if my mum did, she used to get quite angry, and if she did, the other grown-ups would be like, hey man, you need to calm down or whatever, do you know what I mean? And she could just, the pressure was off. She didn't have to get up every morning. You know, jobs were shared. At that stage it was pretty radical. I mean, they shared all their clothes and stuff. Like, I did a podcast with someone else, and he seemed to think they shared their underwear, but they didn't share their underwear. I think he was a bit OCD, but they share all their clothes, because I know that because we've got various photos of various different women wearing the same Afghan dress. They obviously really liked it.
That's right. It went through the wash. It was the first one to get to the pegs on the line.
Yeah.
We interviewed someone from Whiteway a number of podcasts back, and they did share underwear. There used to be a communal pile of nicely ironed underpants.
Ironed, blimey. Yeah. Well, I mean, I remember mum saying, because the thing is, my mum, even though it's really weird, it's a real double-edged sword, this whole kind of this word privilege. It really gets me, because, you know, what is privilege? Because I don't know, it's complicated. But anyway, when she was growing up in this sort of crumbling mansion, they didn't have any running water. And the water came from the lake. So their whites were never white. So when my mum left home and went to live with the gypsies, she was like, I'm going to make sure my whites are white. And she was like, took real pride in her whites being white. And then when she moved to Shrub, it was like, it all went in the twin tub. She was like, oh.
Yeah, back to grey. Everything back to grey.
But it was worth it. She was like, oh, come on. And she was very invested in this whole egalitarian sharing everything. You know, she really believed in that. And I think that is kind of wonderful in a way. I think they were really doing something quite amazing in that sense.
Yeah. So you had older siblings who obviously had moved in at the time in 1973. And so how long until you came along?
Okay, so this is interesting, because I've only just found out some of this family history. I didn't really know it before. My dad was 10 years younger than my mum, and he turned up in 1974. And I've only recently found out it was because he got kicked out of this other house in Suffolk, which everyone thought there was lots of people sharing houses. Some were communes and some weren't, and there was just an assumption that if it was a shared house, it was a commune. But I went and knocked on the door of this house in Suffolk last year, and I chatted to the man there. He was really nice, and he said, "Oh yeah, everyone thought this was a commune, but it wasn't. It was my house." And he said, and your dad just got quite sort of bossy about, like, because they were all into this macrobiotic diet, and it was like a kind of cult. It was really strict, like, you know, you're only allowed to eat this and that, and And it was, and I think my dad, he just, the word that this chap used was dogmatic. He said, oh, he just got dogmatic around this macrobiotic diet. And I had to ask him to leave because I wasn't going to have someone telling me how to behave in my house. And my dad, and the thing is that this man's house was quite near another commune in Suffolk. That was the Rockstar commune. I don't know if you've heard of it, Church Farmhouse. It's where the Globs lived.
No, I might have to look. Jonathan might have, but no, not familiar with that one.
Well, you should try and see if you can interview someone from them, because they were always in the limelight, because there were a couple of the brothers who lived there were related to royalty, and one of them's stepdad was Jeremy Thorpe, who I only just found out who Jeremy Thorpe is, but yeah. So my dad. So, and the thing is, some of the Globs were like. They were quite well known, and they were sort of like evangelizing hippies. They had this rock band called the Global Village Trucking Company. Everyone was very hung up on what's he called? Marshall Rosenberg. He coined a lot of phrases that we use today, like global village, and he kind of predicted the internet and stuff like that. But all the hippies were quite into him. He was a philosopher. And the Global Village Trucking Company, they were amazing what they did. They managed themselves. They eschewed being managed by sort of EMI or whatever it's called. And because they had these sort of connections, that there was quite a lot of media interest in them. And they used to go around and play free gigs, and they used to play in Norwich Prison and stuff like that, and just play wherever they could for free. And the music and lyrics that they sang were really sort of part of the whole scene and the movement of, like, drop out, live in the country, share everything, grow your own veg. You don't have to buy into the whole capitalist, materialist society. You can live like us. And you know what I mean? It was like, it was quite exciting.
And sorry, Dutsy, and you went and knocked on the door. You just kind of went, oh, I know, I'm going to go find stuff out. I'm going to go knock on a door.
I did. I knocked on 2 doors.
Really?
Yeah, because my brother, who's like written a book and was going to write about the commune, basically kind of gave me this interview that he'd done with Mum, and she talked about my dad and said stuff that I had never heard before. And so I was like, wrote loads of notes, found where in Suffolk these places were, and did like a house swap. I don't know if you heard of a house swapping thing where you go on holiday.
Yeah.
And I found, it was like being a detective, and I found these like houses. So I found the commune first. I found the church farmhouse, and I took this photo of me as a little baby and went and knocked on the door. And the man who owned it, he bought it from the Global Village Trucking Company in 1976. So
wow.
Nothing has changed, and also he's really excited about the history of the place. And when he took me in, I mean, this will make hair stand up on the back of your hands or whatever, because he was really nice. And he said, because my brother learned to ride his bike there, and he said, oh, do you want to come in and have a look around? And I said, yeah, I'd love to. And he said, when I bought it, he said, I found loads of yellow pages like stuffed between the floorboards to sort of soundproof the band practice room. And they'd taken them from like phone boxes and stuff. And then as we were walking out one of the rooms, he said, oh, I forgot to show you this. And we turned round, and on the wall, painted on the wall, was this absolutely beautiful mural of the Michael and Martha ley line that runs from Hopton-on-Sea to Carnley's Bowl in Cornwall. And I was like, God, this is the story of my life.
Oh wow. Did you take a photo?
I did. And not only that, painted sort of in the landscape was this kind of shape of a woman's body and a woman's face. It was so weird. It was like, whoa. It was a real like quantum leap moment.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, and then I asked him about this other chap that my dad used to live with, because they were all into Whole Foods. Because in those days, if you wanted to eat Whole Foods, it was like getting a drug dealer. You had to get a supplier because you couldn't get rice anywhere. Do you know what I mean? So it was a kind of, they were really revolutionary. They were pioneers, I think. I mean, this is why I want to write about them, because I just feel people don't realise how so much mainstream stuff that we take for granted was kickstarted by these pioneering hippies who just said, we want to do things differently. And I really think we owe them a lot, actually.
Yeah. So were you tracing your roots, or were you seeking your father?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I think probably more the former, actually.
Mm.
But I did feel that in doing that, I got some real closure around my dad, because my dad did that classic. I mean, he doesn't even really merit to be called dad. He did that classic cosmic capitalist thing, a bit like Steve Jobs, where he did the hippie thing and then cut his hair off and made loads of money out of it. And there's, I mean, I don't want to kind of go on, so I don't have an axe to grind or anything like that, but there is some kind of hypocrisies there, in the sense that he would wax lyrical on the TV about organic food, but nobody knew that I existed in his circle of friends.
Yeah, I think it is, there is a bit of a phenomenon, isn't there, about the commune experience for some people was just a bit like a gap year,
Yeah,
an experience to be had, and then go, then take up your career in banking and
yeah, yeah.
and oil.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I am grateful to him for like promoting healthy food and all that, but he wasn't. The more I find out about him, the more I realize that, people just didn't really like him very much. And also, I just think this was like a hidden part of his history that he hasn't really been very honest about in his, what he went on to do, sort of thing. And I think it was just a phase in his life, but I feel like he's commodified and commercialized the culture that I was born into, really, which is a bit galling, but hey ho.
So this journey that you went knocking on people's doors and chasing things, is that so just taking us back again. So your mum had you were actually born in Shrub. What are your early memories of that?
Okay, so my earliest memory is climbing out of my cot to go to the loo. We only had one toilet and there were loads of us living there. I don't know how we coped. My husband was like, surely people must have got to go outside. Like, how could you? Because we've got 2 loos in our house. No, we're still having to queue up outside the door. And there wasn't a lock on the door, I will say that. And that used to really annoy my mum, because whenever she's having a bath, someone would come in and do a poo, and she'd get really annoyed. And whenever she said anything, they'd say, "Hey man, don't lay your trip on me. I need a shit."
Fantastic.
My mum was like, "Oh, I'm trying to have a bath." Yeah, sorry, I can't remember what your question was now. Yeah, so climbing out of my cot. Well, I must have been about 2, because it was basically, it was like, it used to be 2 or maybe even 3 farm workers' cottages, and I think they were condemned. Like we had no ins. When Owen bought them, Owen Thompson was the guy who bought the place. It had no electricity, no inside bathroom. So they got a grant to build a bathroom upstairs, and then they wired it all up for electricity, and then they just basically knocked it into one great big farmhouse, which I think it possibly had been originally before it was turned into cottages.
Yeah.
So there were lots of rooms, and there was what we used to call the South Cottage and the North Cottage. And then there was attic bedrooms right at the top. So like 3 stories to it. And when we moved there, we basically just all moved into the attic. So I shared a room with my brother. And then the next room along was my sister's. And then the next room along from that was my other brother's. And then my mum, I think she did originally sleep in the attic with Sarah, but then I think she had a room downstairs. But yeah, so my early memories are, so when I lived there was a whole nother load of people, because my mum left when I was about a year old, because it ended up being quite a lot of people left. So it was sort of like drifting people coming in and out, and maybe not staying for that. It tended to be when people got into sort of established couples, they'd want to leave and set up homes somewhere else and just have a and there was a bit of a dynamic whereby couples would always back each other up, which meant it was tricky for single people. Sometimes that was kind of a bit of a dynamic that was going on. But when I was born, there was only actually my mum and us 4 kids, and another family with 2 kids, and then a local woman who'd moved to the commune. And so it was not very many people, and it ended up being a very tense dynamic between my mum and the other mum, and it was pretty horrendous, actually. So she left and then came back when I was about 18 months off, so she'd met my stepdad in between times. So my mum and my dad were only together for like 3 months, and when she said she was pregnant, he left that night.
Oh
yeah, he didn't hang around.
That's a bit rubbish.
Yeah, it's a bit rubbish, isn't it?
Yeah. So basically move back in. It sounds to me like the dynamic, like sometimes one of the things that people have said to me about the benefit of living in community is that it dilutes the personalities. You can kind of,
100%.
if it's big enough, you can avoid somebody without it being an issue. It sounds like the numbers went quite low at some point and that didn't happen.
And it got a bit intense. So when she moved back, it was quite busy actually. There was a family that, so basically my mum met my stepdad, grew up, he was a working class man, grew up in Barking, and I think his dad, I don't know if his dad, it was quite near Ford Dagenham, so his dad might have worked at Ford Dagenham, but my stepdad was like a mod basically, and there was a big squatting scene in London, and he came from a very conventional family. He got a job in the Bank of China doing something, I don't know what, and married very young, I think they lived in a council flat, and he found an advert in the back of the Time Out saying, "Want to find yourself? Ring this number." So he was quite intrigued, and he went. No one had phones in those days, so it's a good story, isn't it?
Yeah. Did he go to a phone box?
So he went to a phone box and rang this number, right? And it rang and rang and rang and rang and rang, and then he was just about to hang up, and this woman answered, this American woman, and he said, "Oh, I've just found this." This ad in the Time Out and about finding myself. She said, "Yeah, come to this squat in Watford on a Thursday night. See you there," and hung up. So he's like, "Oh
my God, it's a bit like being recruited for the sort of CIA."
Yeah, I know. The thing is, there were loads of squats in London at that time. Anyway, he went to this big old squat in Watford, and they were doing sort of kind of encountery group type things there. But the thing that they were doing, the particular thing they were doing on a Thursday night was something called drilling, which was like a kind of group searching for an answer for a problem sort of thing. And he was just completely captivated by the whole culture and everything. He was just like, "This is great. Like, I don't want to live in a flat and work in the Bank of China anymore. I want to move into this squat." So he did, and he invited his wife. And she said and he told me that the atmosphere at the squat was so intense, she fainted.
You can imagine it, can't you? She'd be like, I don't know what your stepdad's name, but "Roger, have you lost your mind?"
Yeah, no, but then she went off with some Brazilian bloke, and that was the last you saw of her. So, but anyway, the thing is, he got to know this couple who lived in this squat, who gravitated towards East Anglia because there was this phenomenon called the Barsham Fairs. I don't know if you know about the Barsham Fairs, but they were legendary in their time. I mean, they I think the idea came from something in America called a Renaissance fair. Now, the Americans are obsessed with kind of ye olde England, aren't they?
Oh yeah.
They had these like medieval fairs in America, and then someone, I guess, knew someone in Suffolk, and there was three blokes. There was an American guy, an artist, and then this chap whose door I knocked on. And they set up the Barsham Fairs. And the first Barsham Fair they had, it was like a little village fete next to a church, like 250 people. By the time the third Barsham Fair came, they were like 20,000 people. 15.
Wow.
I mean, you could not believe how successful these fairs were. And it wasn't just hippies; it was local people. It was all sorts of different people, and they made handcraft. There were rules about it, so you could have nothing electric, no motor vehicles, no amplification. They were beautiful, and people came and they sold crafts that they'd made. The hippies were really into not working in an office in some mindless job, but taking the time to really learn a craft and do it beautifully and to the nth degree. And that was a massive part of the ethos of the commune that I was born in. I mean, they call themselves a self-actualizing commune, and actually I think that's a pretty accurate description. I mean, we all used to laugh and say that meant that it was basically the young ones, but but they did really learn some amazing crafts. So this guy whose door I knocked on, right, he said first he was a bit suspicious because he didn't really like my dad. And then when I told him that my dad had left us, he was really nice to me, and he said, "Oh, let me show you around." And it turned out he'd learned how to make. He was learning, well, he'd got into making carts, and there are very few wheelwrights left in this country, basically. I think there's like one, and it's the Queen's wheelwright or the King's wheelwright. But one of them lived at the commune where we lived, and who knows how to make cart wheels anymore? It's like it's a dying art. so, you know, it did, living there meant it afforded people the time to really pursue a craft. And a lot of the people who either lived there temporarily or passed through there ended up being master craftsmen, you know, making cabinets, getting thatching apprenticeships, you know, proper sort of rural crafts that needed an injection of youth and vitality, really. And I think that they did provide that, and I think it's a great thing, actually.
So how would you describe your childhood?
Well, I really liked living there. I mean, I basically, it was interesting what you're saying about people being diluted. So, you know, I just lived in the kids' world, really. I mean, so there was another family that lived there. They had a baby, twins the same age as me, and then an older boy about the same age as one of my brothers. So I just played with them all the time. I mean, the twins. And there were quite a lot of kids coming and going. People come and visit us. Their dad had built a Wendy house. We had like a kids' playroom, and he built a Wendy house in there. So we spent a lot of time in there arguing over Kermit the Frog, because that was the only puppet we had, the real puppet. Otherwise, it was holding up teddies and dollies.
Yeah.
But yeah, we just played in the kids' world, really. We were either in the kids' room playing in there, or playing outside. We played outside a lot. We had goats, we had chickens, we had a horse. And then our summers were spent going to the fairs. And so we just would hitch up the wagon and go from fair to fair to fair to fair. And my mum would do pony rides, so we always had money for ice creams. And it was great fun. I mean, I loved it. I really loved it. And I'll tell you what I loved the most, I think, is having lots of grown-ups around who were like family to me. They really loved me, and they were really kind to me. And I mean, I know you hear horror stories, but you get those in all sorts of families. You get good and bad, don't you? But I feel like we were more family to each other than our actual birth family were to them or us, if you see what I mean. I mean, I didn't really know my granny. I mean, I was just a shameful little bastard hippie kid, as far as she was concerned. You know what I mean? Like, she didn't really want to meet me. And my grandfather didn't even know I existed because it was so shameful. And when
my gosh,
he was really upset, and he said to my mum, "I've done far worse than you. I want to meet all my grandchildren." It's this whole sort of class system and snobbery, and that's what they were turning their backs on. And also this kind of myth that all hippies were like university middle class dropouts, privileged, blah blah. It's not true. My granddad on my dad's side was a lorry driver. Neil's from a working class family. I mean, loads of working class people. It was a classless thing. It was like people didn't care. This is why someone else asked me to go on a podcast about the counterculture. And I got really, when I looked at all the people he'd interviewed, I got really cross, because he'd just gone for like rich and famous people. And I thought, we're totally missing the point, because the whole counterculture scene that I grew up in, they eschewed class, they eschewed privilege, they eschewed money. That was the whole point of it, was like you drop out. And that's why it's not written down. It's a bit like it's an oral history, isn't it? It's like gypsies. There's not many books written about gypsy culture. I mean, more now maybe, but I'd say there's even less about counterculture, hippie, kid culture, because it's an oral culture, and it's no one was really interested unless you were related to Jeremy Thorpe or the Queen.
I think you're right. I think it's you have to really look, but actually once you start peeling away the layers of, or in your case knocking on other people's doors, it is there. The worry is that time will slowly kind of eat up all that history. You know, somebody will buy that house, they might paint over this mural not knowing what it is. Gone,
yeah.
all gone.
I know. Well, this is why it's so precious, and this is why I need to write this book now, that I want to write about it. It's written about a lot more in America, I will have to say. There's a fantastic book called Wild Child that's an anthology of girls like me who you know, talking about their experiences, and they're very mixed. You know, the forward is by Moon Zappa. It's very funny, actually. I think she's written a memoir, but you know, it's interesting because this offers a spectrum of different. I mean, I think it depends on your personality, doesn't it? Because for me personally, I loved living there. I had brilliant birthday parties. All my friends from school wanted to come because we had baby goats and lots of freedom. You know, it did get a bit tougher as I got older because parents' prejudices trickle down to the kids, but the kids themselves, you know, kids aren't born with prejudice, are they? And so I actually was very happy and confident, and I feel like it was the best grounding, you know, the best start I could have had in life, really, because my mum, you know, she was could be difficult. We could all be difficult, but I felt that she was diluted, like you say, by all these other grown-ups. Because
How would you say it's shaped you? You know, it's like obviously you're a self-actualized adult now, like the rest of us. But how would you say it shaped your, you know, you as an individual, as a person?
well, that's a really interesting question, and it was one I was discussing with my husband the other day, because I'd say, because I'm one of 5 kids, and I would say out of all of them, I'm definitely the most hippie. I feel a bit embarrassed saying that.
No.
I it's massively shaped who I am. And I think it's only really, I mean, I'm going to be 50 next year, but it's only really in the last year that it has all started making sense to me, like where I fit in and why I am like I am, and why I think like I do, and why I'm interested in certain things. And it's hugely to do with Shrub Farm. And you know, you might think that that's surprising because I was only there for 5 years, but the thing is, it was my whole kind of gestation and culture and everything. It stems from that place, and it's like had a massive effect on me in the sense that I care very deeply about the environment, about justice, about peace, about sharing, about community, about beauty, about the countryside. You know, all of those things are massively part of the culture that I was born into, you know, and almost to the point where I'm kind of searching for something that I guess is home, that I haven't really, I'm not sure if I've really found it yet. I mean, I developed a real interest in the Bruderhof community last year. I went to go visit them because I do feel that there is a better way to live than just nuclear family, you know, stuck in a flat on your own. You know, I think we need connection, and I feel like we've been sold this lie of individualism and kind of selfishness and I, and it's actually destroying us as humans. It's like, and the planet, you know. So it's hugely affected me, and then, you know, Matt, I said to Matt, why has it affected me like that, not my siblings? And Matt said, well, it's partly to do with like who you are as a person. I think everyone's different, aren't they? But I mean, I think, yeah, sorry.
That's okay. I was going to say, and it tends to be that larger families or families beyond 2, there's that each child is born into their own place within the family,
Yeah,
within the culture, within the time, and that would have also shaped you.
yeah, definitely. I mean, the thing is, you see, I am from a big family, but I think that my older 2 siblings will, I mean, I'd say probably my older brother liked Shrub more than my other brother, because he liked it there. There was a lot, because there was a lot of freedom, you know, and there was a lot of, I think he just felt like he could, I mean, he just had a great time. He used to zoom up and down the track on his motorbike with his mates. They had loads of fun. And it was quite near a racetrack. So at night, sometimes they break into the racetrack and zoom around that.
It does sound like the freedom was pretty fantastic.
It was amazing. I mean, I remember riding on the back of his motorbike. I loved it. Yeah, he loved it. You know, and there was just creativity as well. You know, like you could just do whatever you wanted, play the guitar, paint pictures, learn how to make wheels, keep goats. You know, I think it was hard work for the grown-ups. I will say that. I think it was really tough for them. But for us kids, I mean, my other brother obviously was just like really mortified and hated being a hippie and just wanted to like get out of there. But he's got a very different personality to me and my other brother, I guess. He more self-conscious and more kind of, I don't know. I think he would describe himself as a dreamer. And I suppose like the biggest drawback for me, really, I mean, although I did have my stepdad, is that I would like to have had a dad, really. I think that wasn't really thought through very well. I think it was an experimental time, and I think that I think when they were in it, all the hippies at that time, they really thought they were going to stay like that for the rest of their lives. But actually, I think for a lot of them, they moved on to other things. And some of them stayed in couples, but a lot didn't. And there is a whole swathe of kids who don't really have dads or have got crap dads or selfish dads. I mean, nothing against men. I don't mean to generalize. Obviously, not all men are like that. But I think that's been quite hard for me, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that is again a common theme in communal living of that period is that the lid had been lifted in a way on relationships and the rejection of the nuclear family, but at the same time as the rejection of the nuclear family, we kind of we kind of overlooked, I guess, collectively the importance of those direct family connections, the ability to call on someone in your, if you needed them, and the assumption, I think, sometimes that community would always step into that void. It's a really interesting question in itself.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, and I think dads are really important. I really do. I think they're really important for boys, and I think they're really important for girls. And I think people, I am concerned that it feels like society sometimes thinks they're not important, but I think they really are. And I think it's a real sadness and a real loss to kids not to have a proper dad. I mean, having said that, there were some really lovely men that I grew up with who I totally adored, including my stepdad. I mean, I wanted to marry him. I know that sounds a bit dodgy, but I think it's normal for little girls to fall in love with, like, I adored him. But I guess the sadness for me is that I think that he realized too late that he probably was my dad in more ways than, because I'd known him since but because he wasn't my biological dad. I don't know, it's all a bit kind of bit of a mishmash, but yeah, there were some really good people that we grew up with. There were some really lovely people. There were some really horrible people as well, but I think sometimes nuclear families just don't really work. And I think sometimes families don't really work. They don't really step up, blood families. They don't really step up in the way they should. I mean, one of the things I learned from this interview with my mum and my brother was that there were two brothers that lived at the commune, and they were not university dropouts. They were local working class people. One was a plumber, one was an electrician. They and their family were crap. And like one of them, their blood family, and one of them, he tried to kill himself, and it was all. And the hippies were really worried about him, and they contacted his parents, and they just didn't care.
Wow.
So we were like more family to each other than our actual, and you could say the same about my mum's family. Her culture rejected her because she had all these raggle-taggle kids, and but I didn't feel rejected by the people I grew up with. I felt really loved by them and very secure, and like I actually think it's really good for kids to be around a lot of people. It kind of smooths corners off you. Do you know what I mean? Like I think I would probably be a real nightmare if I'd been brought up like that, because I had people sort of laughing at me in a nice way. Do you know what I mean?
I know whenever I visit community, I'm always in awe of the children and young people. They do seem to have a level of presence that perhaps children who aren't brought up communally or in those sorts of settings don't achieve until much later. I think
it does take a village, doesn't it? I think it definitely takes a village to even if it's just in terms of supporting the parents. I mean, as a parent myself, I felt desperately lonely bringing up my children. I would love to have been closer to other families instead of stuck behind a brick wall on my own. You know what I mean? I think that's why my mum went to live with gypsies, because they live outside, and they live extended families, and you can hear everything going on, and it's you just don't know. I mean, nuclear family, it's a very lonely place to be, isn't it? Sometimes in a nuclear family, in a marriage, happily ever after and all that. What does that even mean? It's like, I just think, I don't know. I think people need people, really.
One of the things that we're asking as many of our podcast guests as possible is if they have any key takeaways or some things, some sort of key messages of things that they've learned from communal living, or things that they think are important elements of that. And I wondered if you had anything you'd like to contribute to that thought.
Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose, I suppose everything has a kind of context, doesn't it? And the context of that I was born into was very much, you don't need stuff to make you happy. And you don't need to buy stuff to make you happy. And that is a lie. And don't believe the adverts. And you can actually do an awful lot of things for free. And, just on a practical level, buying food in bulk, that I would say that as a takeaway. I mean, I've only recently actually started doing that with a couple of other families where I live locally, but things like that. And also, I just think community is really, really important. I think it's crucial, actually. And I mean, it's interesting. That's an interesting question, because I feel like, so basically I've been sending off submissions to different literary agents for this book that I'm trying to write about the commune. And most of them have ghosted me, which is just soul destroying, but I've had a few interesting, fascinating. But the most helpful feedback I got is from an agency called the Good Literary Agency. And they said something really interesting, because this is something that I felt that I want to do in writing this book anyway, but they just kind of reinforced my hunch, which was, so what they said to me, it's really interesting, you've got a very strong proposal, it's very authentic, you clearly got a lot of experience, but we know the market really well, and at the moment the market is awash with memoirs. What is selling well is manifestos for change, right? And I went on a lot of protests as a kid against the bomb, anti-nuclear demonstrations, and I found them quite stressful, and I didn't enjoy them. I don't like confrontation, but I do like telling stories. But I know that people don't like to be lectured, and they don't want to be browbeaten, and they don't want to be told how to live. But I guess what I want to do is open a window onto another way of living that people maybe might not have considered, that actually they could take a lot of stuff away from. Do you see what I mean? Do you see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, but you can take all of that learning, all of the things that you took from your own childhood and your experience in different forms of communal living, and to kind of condense those into how we might live in the future, perhaps.
Yeah, like a sort of manifesto for change, really. It's a bit like, so for example, let's take an example, like at the moment, there's this whole culture of like, oh, instead of using a throwaway cup, you could get a cup that you keep forever. And it's like, that is not new, is it?
That's right. It's just called a cup.
I know. It's like, I feel like we've gone full circle. It's like, I look at photos of when my sister was living on the road with my mum in the 1960s. There's no plastic. My mum remembers when plastic was invented. I mean, she's dead now, but that wasn't that long ago. No. So if we could change things, if we can change things that rapidly to go wrong, surely we can change things that rapidly to go right. And one of the really beautiful things about the commune movement that I was born into is that it evolved out of a very, very, very dark time. There'd been 2 world wars. There was a lot of poverty, and then suddenly there seemed to be sort of less poverty, but a recurring thing that keeps coming up the more I research and the more I dig around stuff that people were reading and what inspired them to start living communally is this thing about the darkest hour before the dawn. And I don't know about you, but last year I was immobilized by climate anxiety. I mean, I almost couldn't get out of bed. I just felt terrified. It was probably like a partly perimenopausal thing, but I just like, what can I do? It's like, if you give up hope, you're just joining in. You've got to find a way to, and I feel like that's what the hippies were doing then. They were like, no, we don't need to subscribe to all this. We can actually do something different. And I really respect them for that, because I think that takes a lot of courage and strength and energy. And I think I sort of feel like, anyway, I'm running out of words.
And on that note of hope, I think we are going to draw it to a close, but thank you, Nancy. It's been an absolutely fascinating journey through your experience of the Shrub family. It's been great. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this podcast from Diggers and Dreamers, the go-to place for intentional communities in Britain. As ever, it really helps us if you like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget, you can find out more about communal living at our website, diggersandreamers.org.uk. There you'll find an online directory of existing communities and developing groups within the UK, plus interactive notice boards and information about our publications. One you won't want to miss is the Diggers and Dreamers directory, which has been referred to as the Communard's Bible for 35 years. And now, to play us out, here are the Spaceheads with their tribute to our old mate, Gerard Winstanley. See you next time.